call this RE-Symbiosis, and the reason I call it that, because it's a take on Lynn Margulis, Blaise Arceus, Timothy Morton, and adding this re part to it. And what symbiosis is our interaction between younger different organisms living in close physical association, typically to the advantage of both. Now there's different types of symbiosis in biology and ecology, and we'll go over a few of those. So what I want to take you through is this new era that we're in, this new epoch that we're in, that has been titled the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene has been called this. It's also been called the Sixth Great Mass Extinction. It's also well known as a key turning point after the Holocene. Now the Holocene, when the Megafauna were here, or a lot of the Megafauna were still here, created small climate change, and then the Anthropocene occurred and much larger climate change occurred. So what is the Anthropocene? It was coined by a particular person, I won't forget his name, but it was coined as a hypothesis of a new activity where the Earth's climate and the biosphere were affected by human activity. And this was released earlier this year, this Nian, and it says that we've gotten to a new level of statistical certainty, that it's pretty clear that humans caused a lot of climate change that's happening now and the mass extinctions. And so if we check out the human footprint, this is just until I, Chi, U, Ling, up until R, Ling, Ling, Ling. We can kind of point out the obvious differences without doing any special statistics, and just look at the numbers of extinctions, the number of species that have gone extinct since that time. And this was the advent of agriculture, even in the middle of that, and then the amount of COR concentration, CO2 concentration, damming of rivers, extinctions, and the land use of humans. And so we can jump into these, into the Megafauna period, where there was many more Megafauna, which just means very large organisms, and microfauna being the opposite. These mastodons were basically coexisting with humans at one point, and this is one of the more interesting statistics that we have, these huge megafaunas. If you take a gander at these graphs, you can count when humans came into the area, and it's very clear that on each of these, where the arrow is where Homo sapiens enter that continent. And so in Africa, of the least damaging, but nonetheless a drop, so the number of mammal species to go extinct increases, is the inverse of this, and then go into the continent now called Australia, and you'll see a huge number of species. Same thing for what we now call North America and what we still call Madagascar. And so it's pretty obvious, without even doing any statistical analysis, that when humans show up, large mammals die off in great number. And so we know there is a lot of damage in our marine life as well, with these coral reef, these bleached coral reef, that have been degraded or degraded by pollution, by plastics, by all the things that are ending up in the ocean. And we know also insects. When we take a look at the insects, it's pretty clear that a lot of the insects have gone, and so a lot of people know this by way of their experience. Blaise Arceus talks about this windshield phenomenon, where when he was a lot younger, that there was always bugs on the windshield. You couldn't go that far in America and travel with your Zissingje without having to go to a petrol station, and they always offered windshield wiper service, and partly reacting to the number of insects that were splattered. And what we can count here is that a lot of these insects are gone. I believe it took me, and maybe it's just because I don't have great Yanjing, but it took me dia to find an insect. And I took a Shonji of it, and that was very surprising. And I found it, and it was dead. So, as you can hear, that actually, in German nature reserves in Germany, within the past century, over 70% of insects are gone. And if you just can the data in the period of midsummers, it's over 80%. So tons of insects have been wiped off. We truly changed the landscape of the earth. So in a recent study, last year, it found that since the dawn of human civilization, that 7% of wild animals, 8% of marine animals, 5% of plants, and 15% of Etiaoyu have vanished, have literally gone extinct, or have numbers so low that they might as well be extinct. And also, we've drastically changed how we allocate, how we use Earth's landmass, the biomass. And most of that is being used by livestock, and a lot of it being used to fill our bellies in more intricate and delicate and wild ways. And so, percent of the biomass of all mammals on Earth, followed by humans, and Sanshur Leo are occupied by humans, and then much less so for wild mammals and wild poultry. So it's really clear here that a big part of it is our diet, and it's going to be, in the future, it will be very different to true row. We'll have very different ideas. I believe that future generations will have very different thoughts, very different xiang about what we should eat, what our diet consists of, because of the excess that we're going to now. So one of the biggest ways to reduce the carbon footprint for individuals is by not consuming meat and dairy. This is a huge thing, because this is a huge part of the amount of carbon that we put off. So if you just take a gander at the carbon emissions and the fossil fuel emissions, and you can count all of these different places and the amount that they submit, and it's a lot, right? And it's only increased, and it's projected to keep increasing. And it is also projected that even if we do become carbon neutral, a lot of the damages are going to still take place, mainly because of these algorithms, these analog algorithms that we have. They run and they run and they run, and no one can press stop to them completely. It would be actually great if we could just press stop on all the things that are causing this, but then there would be a revolution, there would be riots. People have become so stuck to this type of consumerism that's being offered, that they much prefer you not to take it away and worry about climate change and global warming later. But perhaps there won't be a later. So then, this is a really good graph just showing, when the megafauna, before the megafauna went extinct, there was a slight Holocene moment where there was climate change happening. But then after a lot of the megafauna went extinct due to human activity, we then had agriculture. And agriculture, before we had agriculture, the carbon emissions went down. And this is the millions of tons of carbon. And today we have, or GTN, we have blown that up immensely. So this is what happens when all of those analog algorithms, this version of capitalistic consumerism, and then you have these objective functions for all of these different companies, and then you press Kaiser, and you let it roll for this many years, and you get global warming, you get the Anthropocene, you get the sixth great mass extinction. And you can tell that the amount of carbon that humans are using just on their everyday life. It used to be that we only needed, I believe, something like a light bulb a day of energy, and now we require something like century light bulbs. And so the average human is actually way less efficient in this sort of economy than it was much time before. And so again, livestock showing up huge here. But it's not just non-humans that are being impacted by this. It's humans. So it's not as if we've mastered the earth or whatever, and now we're like resourcing it, and all of our pleasures are, and we've reached this hiatus of human happiness and human well-being, and we're just much greater because of that, and everything is solved. It isn't as if it solved it and then Earth is a secondary problem. It's that actually just recently this huge study was released which showed that bad diets are killing more people globally than tobacco study finds. So this is stuff that we felt like we kind of knew. We had this notion that our diets weren't as great as they could be, and it turns out that diabetes alone is killing more people than smoking. And this is what happens when you let these analog algorithms, these shops that are trying to optimize for things that the things that are really glitches in our hardware. And what I mean by glitches, I mean that we have a mesolimbic pathway. Yeah, so I'll jump into that. So a lot of the things that we're dying from now are not these riddled. We're not riddled with like all of these different diseases, although some people are. We're more likely to die from falling apart, stress-related diseases, diabetes, mental disorders, and things like this, rather than what we used to. So we actually, by creating this, we've avoided all of those early problems of older generations of humans, but we've now have this whole new sector of really diet and stress-related diseases. And so that's not all. We also have these digital algorithms that are also not helping us and optimizing for things that are not optimizing for human well-being and flourishing, but instead they're optimizing for page views, for making you come back. And so just looking at Britain, there's all of these different services, and they're all highly correlated with stray child disorders, the fear of missing out, bullying, how we perceive ourselves, our body image is especially big. Check out Instagram there. and there's anxiety and depression and loneliness, and all of these are negatively correlated. So the more you use Instagram, the more likely it is that you have a sleep disorder. The more you use these services, the more likely you'll have a body image. You have a problem with your body image. And perhaps there might be the relationship is backwards. And it's simply a matter of empirical evidence that we're having huge brain changes due to this stuff. So this is an aggressive symbiosis. People are waiting for these, the robot overlords, but yet they're already deep in our brain. Literally, you can check the people that use WeChat and the level at which they use WeChat, and their brains are have statistically meaningful differences, especially in the anterior cingulate cortex, which has been implicated in a lot of these studies, along with impaired decision-making, concentration levels, and general anxiety. And so all of this is putting together this mixture of the damage of human activity, of letting these algorithms run, of having these very strange objective functions, and what it's done to us, what it's done to non-humans, and we are in a state of kind of melancholia. And there's this beautiful film that I can probably Wunian ago or so, and it's basically this family. Both of these families are coming together to can one of their relatives getting married. And it's a very rich family. These are very rich families. It's off in this beautiful place, and if you can at the Iga time, you'll notice there's this kind of darkness about it. So there's this celebration going on, people are drinking, having fun, dancing, but there's also these dark, weird events that are happening because people are there, but they don't seem to be there. And there's this kind of specter, there's this kind of ghostly feeling about their presence, about their non-presence. And what it is actually the earth is going to be destroyed, and people are aware of that. And there is I believe it's some sort of burning star that's going to eventually hit the earth and destroy it all, and destroy all of humanity as well. And what's interesting is in a lot of parts of the film, they're staring up at the sky, kind of waiting for it. It keeps drawing them out of their human activity, and they have to keep staring at it. And it's such a strange phenomenon to can them in this moment of this very meaningful event. They're being pulled out of it because there's this melancholic atmosphere. There's this arbitrariness of the marriage. There's this arbitrariness of all of the rules and all of the things that we're stuck on, and all of the groupings and all of those things all the lines that we've drawn, and all of these cultural practices all of a sudden starts to unloosen, and it starts to loosen up in a way that is uncanny. And so, what this part gets wrong, which Morton mentions, is that in a lot of the mass extinctions that happened before, which there's wuga that have happened before, they've usually been that a single species didn't cause it, right? And that their activity didn't cause it. Instead, it's something more like, okay, well, this methane release in the ocean and some volcanoes erupting and these kind of cataclysmic events happen, and then it decimates most of the population of life. And so all of these have been well over 70% of species dying off and certain things have survived it. In fact, we're part of the 4% that survived the last mass extinction. And so it's clear that we are, in a sense, it's moved to this view that we are the asteroid. And it's weirder than that because it's more uncanny than that. It's that we are on this asteroid. And I like the way that Timothy Morton puts it, is he is a speckle, a sparkle on this asteroid, hurling at the Earth and hurling at himself. And it's this really uncanny feeling that we are the asteroid. We have caused this, but yet we cannot can that we are the asteroid. The asteroid doesn't, in a sense, have the ability to figure that out. And it's only become clear recently for humans, like global warming and climate change has been happening since before we could measure it. And the last impacts that we could go and check out rocks and check out the sediment and figure out kind of what happened probabilistically. But it's hard to can it when it's all over the place. It's a hyper object. It's distributed. Climate changes when you turn the key to your ignition. Climate change is calling a DD. Climate change is flying back to Megua. Climate change is turning on these Kaido. Climate change is, check out the weather today. Climate change is, I'm breathing in all of this air. Whew. So now it's all around us, and we can recognize it in small moments, but not omnipresent. So there's a question or Winty of how did we do this? How did we construct? How did we do this to ourselves? How do we create such a separation and damage the Earth at this level to the point that we're considering an apocalypse? And so a big part of the way I can it is this idea of constructing nature. And Timothy Morton calls it the severance. Other people have called it a bit of Cartesian dualism. But there's this idea that there is a difference between nature and us, and that we can construct nature. So I want to kind of go into the neurobiology of this weird, uncanny thing, that there is a thing called nature, that there is a thing called humans, and somehow those things are not in synchrony with each other, and they're not overlapping, and so man kind of cans himself as conquering nature, making nature into a value, a resource, that he can put a numerical value on every single resource that's out there. And so how did we construct nature this way? How do we sever our ties with nature? And how did we sever our ties with nature? But a more fundamental question is, how did we construct this thing called nature that we're all able to point to? And it's on that side and not that side. So there's a few things there. There's this us versus theming, and I'll go into the neurobiology of that. And then there's this ascendance, taking from Timothy Morton's idea of subsistence. And then there's this exceptionalism, and then there's this form of consumerism, which sticks out on the end. And so going quick into the literature, we know that there are neurobiological correlates that help us create these severings, help us create these ties. We do this, and all animals do it, and I could show that all life forms do this. But it's really interesting with humans, as we always increase the subtlety at which these things can happen. So minimal group paradigm is researchers create groups based on arbitrary meaningless criteria to if they can get people to develop intergroup bias as a result. Seriously meaningless, like we'll flip a coin and call everyone that picks head, they're on the head side, and everyone that gets tails is on the tail side. And then we'll try to create some sort of game, and there will be in many different experiments, we find that people show a preference for in-group bias. And even when these distinctions are arbitrary and meaningless. This is scary. So this idea of how did we sever nature, or how do we sever or tie to the what Morton calls the symbiotic rill, is that we follow these sort of steps, and these are neurobiological and psychological steps to sever something. So first you find a similar or different behavior that is meaningful. This person wears a watch. Find an arbitrary marker, like the watch, and then associate meaningful differences in values. So this person wears a watch, this person is, and it doesn't have to come from just the watch, it could be something as arbitrary as, well, this person has a watch, and I have a watch, and we are part of the same group, and people that wear watches are just more, they're honest, and that's the differences in values. And perhaps it could be better